Good morning, everyone. Welcome back. I think where we left off yesterday, I think we were in the middle of the Duke presentation, but I think we're going to, I think everybody's in agreement to do Mr. Dharma Wardna today to start with. So we'll ask him to come forward and get sworn in. Oh, let's cut that microphone on. Punch that button right there. Right. He is. That's what they're doing.
I'm Hasaldar Mardana. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Welcome.
Thank you.
We'll turn it over to you. Let you start.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Firstly, I would like to request that my pre-filed testimony to be filed as if read by the stand.
Okay. Mr. Dharma Wardna's pre-filed direct testimony will be entered into the record as though given orally from the stand. And okay.
Mr. Chairman, I would also like to request my show battle to be filed.
Okay. We'll also enter Mr. Dharma Wardna's cerebral testimony will be entered into the record as though given orally from the stand.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman and fellow commissioners, thank you for this opportunity. I will summarize my testimony. I have three main points here. The first is about using the minimum system concept for calculating the basic facilities charge. The second will be on the pass-through costs on customer interconnect system. And the third is related to all the pass-through costs related to CCR and Lee Nuclear Station and similar infrastructure strategic issues that Duke is requesting in this rate case. So I would like to request that the minimum system concept not to be used for calculating the basic facilities charge. Firstly, because there is no economic study given by Duke on what exactly the impact is. So Duke is saying that there is going to be an impact, but there is no quantitative study on this given by numbers. There are no numbers saying what is the impact to Duke. So the argument, if you look at this, the argument is that the tariff should be more cost reflective than it is right now. But the tariff should also be simple. And it is always going to be some not so cost reflectiveness in the tariff. Why? Because if you look at a feeder, say Clemson, which feeds my home, the person who lives next to the feeder head, next to the substation, will incur almost no cost to supply energy. Whereas I live far away from the feeder, at the very end, the real cost to supply me is much higher. So there is always some unfairness in the system. But we always need to consider that the tariff should be simple. That is part of the policy when making the tariff. So the next argument against the minimum system cost, it's not a theoretical, it's logic. So let's say the feeder that supplies my house in Clemson. So right now, assume that it can supply 100 people, 100 customers like me. I'm pretty sure that the same feeder can supply 1,000 or 10,000 customers. Now, according to the definition even given by Duke, so a customer cost is something that is not volumetric, but something that is always proportional to the number of customers. So you take $10 from me. If you have 100, the cost should be 1,000. If it's 10,000, the cost should be 100,000. But that is not so. And I'm not saying that this should be a volumetric charge either. It's unallocable. And as far as cost setting or tariff setting principles are concerned, I believe that we need to give stability, consider stability in this case, and go with the current method. But if in the future Duke does give a quantitative argument on how it adversely impacts and how the different customer bases, say the number of customers with homes, with vacant homes, or number of net metered customers, how that really affects in cents and dollars, then maybe we can take that and consider that in a future scenario. So that's my recommendation on that. Now on the pass-through costs for CIS, the customer interconnect system, there is 4 million something requested by Duke. I mean, I believe that we should do all this stuff because the future is coming fast. But on the other hand, we need to look at our past. Now, I'm a customer, and I believe in being a proactive customer. So once I saw the bill, so instead of an exhibit, I have given in my pre-file testimony my bill. And all of our Duke customers here, you see, it's like there is no, and even in the night hearings, I think you all have heard this a lot, that Duke just gives the charge. It's like going to Walmart, buying stuff, and you just get the total summed up cost. This concerned me, and I called Duke once, and I told them that I would like to talk to someone who's responsible for this and maybe explain the scenario. And the answer that I didn't get, they asked me to call corporate, and that's about it. And despite the testimony given yesterday, I did not get any method, to further my case. So there is concern on that. So is Duke doing the best with what it has right now? That is a question. And I know that they are really doing good work, but in some areas, there is a lot of space to improve. On the same note, about the free meters, so I was given a free meter, and I was not opted in. I think I'm pretty confident. And the company, or the notices that they give me makes us feel as if it's free meters. And even so I think there should be sort of more transparency on that the customers are paying for the meters. That should go in the marketing, And even in the last storm that we had, it's the cost that you got. I think those should be passed, those are pass-through costs. As a customer, I'm willing to pay for that. Duke is not responsible for what the weather does. So that's fine. But things like the meters, and also additionally to that, based on the testimony yesterday, I think starting from the top to bottom, there is a communication issue. There is not enough sort of information passing through to the workers. And I think Duke will gain a lot of benefit if they look into this further, because customers, they need, the communication should be clear to them. It should go to them, and that will make them satisfied customers. That would have made me much more satisfied than I am. And the third point is on the strategic investments that Duke made, and now Duke is asking to pass through the losses that they are making. On this, I believe that Duke should not take all the blame for that. You can't see the past, but the mechanism with which we can ensure that Duke makes the best decision in the future is by incentivizing not having to pass through, if that is clear to you. So by not giving the whole cost on this, there is an incentive for the future to Duke to make the best decision. But the scenario will change, of course, but that is the incentive for Duke to make the correct decision, in my view. So in addition to that, policy-wise, Duke needs to, I think, be consistent. So if it's price signal, like I got in my house a set of bulbs, LED bulbs, I really appreciate that. Helped me save a lot of money. But if you're just talking about the price signal, that is not the perfect thing, because if the price signal is what makes me move as a customer, then the price should be such that it makes me buy the LED bulbs. It's a decision that I make. So demand side management, so this signal, so that is something, a policy that Duke needs to be consistent on. And in addition to all of this, the decisions so the CCR cost, the compliance cost, if you look at it just from right now, it's just a compliance cost. But if you go to the past and look at the decision taken, the generation mix, that is impacted by that decision, right? If Duke had taken the CCR cost into account at that point of time, the generation mix itself might not have been what it is right now. So finally, I have something to add. That is that we need to be careful on not negatively affecting energy efficiency investments and solar PV adoption by the consumers. Because if this model stays the same, the incentive for efficiency and self-generation will decrease, and there will be more additional centralized capacity growth. Again, this will impact the GIP. So if you look at price signal, the grid plan, the total cost to the utility to serve the customers, that is being impacted. So we should try to look at the future and not inadvertently create a scenario which ring fences this business model right now with guaranteed revenue for the business, which will curtail market innovation and incentivize customers to generate power. So I think that should be taken into account in your decision. So at the end of the day, I believe that we are trying to make choices based on a system that's not going to apply for the future power grid. It's like trying to go to the moon using a car. That's not possible. This business model is, it will, of course, the issues that Duke has shown, they are going to come up, but that's because we are looking at from sort of a car to try to solve the problem to travel to the moon. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Dharmawardena. parties company, No Cross, Vote Solar, NAACP, Coastal Conservation League. Thank you. Sierra Club. He was. Thank you. ORS. I leave anybody else? Walmart. Thank you. Sorry, I got my out of order here. Okay. Mr. Dharma Wardner, thank you for your testimony and thank you for, ma'am. Oh, I just didn't. Okay, commissioners. Sorry. Commissioner Belser.
Morning.
Thank you for being here and for your input. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
I believe you addressed the Customer Information System, the CIS, and am I correct that you're somewhat in favor of them upgrading the CIS?
Yes, ma'am. But looking at, what did not work, because right now I can see my hourly usage in my computer from Duke, my hourly usage, but in my bill I don't get the breakdown, which means, I know how to use a computer and do all that stuff, but for the normal consumer, we need to send a signal like, this is how much. For the first 1,000, you have used, say, 1,250. For the first 1,000, this is the amount per unit into 1,000. Rest 250, this is your rate, and 250 into the rate. So that will give sort of an idea. It's custom education, I guess.
So you still get a paper bill? You haven't opted into electronic?
I'm getting the electronic bill now, but it's the same, ma'am.
Okay,
yeah.
It's the same thing. I haven't opted into electronic where I am, so. And I'm just going through the pre-file testimony, and so we're still hearing testimony, but my understanding is that the CIS, one of the reasons they want it is when you were talking about solar and looking at the future and renewables, that this billing system should help Duke with the renewables and net metering and those issues. Would you agree with that?
Yes, ma'am. We should spend money on this.
Okay. Yeah. All right. And I believe that's all I had, but thank you for being here today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Belser. Any other commissioners? My apologies to the commissioners. Okay. Thank you. Mr. Dharma Wardner, thank you for being here today, and thank you for your testimony.
Thank you, sir.
You may be excused.
Thank you.
Okay, company.
Mr. Chairman, it's with some trepidation that I approached the podium here to address an issue about the Greenwood rate that was raised by Commissioner Belser. We thought that because of the legal issues relating to the Greenwood rate that I would try to explain the position of the company on that to y'all. I'm looking at, once I get my glasses on, I'm looking at Exhibit C to the application, page 55 of 78, which is where there are some changes in the outdoor lighting schedule that apply to Greenwood. The problem is that the mercury vapor and incandescent lighting for outdoor lighting that was available in Greenwood back in the 1960s, those lights are no longer available. The mercury vapor actually was outlawed by the Energy Policy Act, and the incandescent light bulbs are not available either. So the company, if those go out and a customer wants to replace them, the company is considering that a change in character of the connection. That was why that language is in there, We'll replace those with LED light fixtures for the folks. The rate for those LED has a component that is a usage component. The usage component is the old Greenwood rate. So the company is taking steps to make sure that those folks are protected regarding the usage rates and continue to get the old Greenwood rate. So the component of that lighting rate, the component that is usage-based, continues to be the old Greenwood rate. The other thing I wanted to make very clear is that a customer that decides to do this and get this new lighting does not lose his or her access to and continued service under the old Greenwood rate. So for all their other usage, they continue to be on the old Greenwood rate. It's just this one part of their bill if the lighting situation comes up. So we will be glad to, in our proposed order in the case, address that issue and put something in the proposed order that lays that out so y'all can take a look at it. We also have a witness that will be testifying, Michael Pirro, who can answer further questions about this. But because of the legal issues that y'all are familiar with relating to this, we thought it would be good to put that statement from a lawyer on the record. So nothing further. I will sit back down and let Mr. Robinson.
Thank you, Mr. Ellerby. Anybody got a question of Mr. Ellerby before he sits down? Just don't want him to get down without it.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, Mr. Ellerby. I don't have a question, but I'd like to thank you and Duke for making that clarification. My concern was and I understand that these old lights are no longer available. I just didn't want a customer to all of a sudden sign up for lighting and then say, oh, gotcha.
The customers in Greenwood that are on the old Greenwood rate are very, very vigilant about that.
They are. They are. Thank you very much.
You probably would have heard about it.
We've heard that. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, at this time, the company calls Stephen Capps and Steve Immel to the stand. Mr. Chairman, I'll start with Stephen Capps, get him introduced, and then move to Steve Immel. Mr. Capps, please state your full name and your business address for the record.
Stephen Douglas Capps. My business address is 526 South Church Street, Charlotte, North Carolina.
By whom are you employed and in what capacity?
Get close to that mic too, Mr. Capps, because it doesn't pick you up if you're not speaking, and we want everybody to hear you out there in live stream land.
Yes, sir, I understand. I'm employed by Duke Energy Corporation, and I am the Senior Vice President of Nuclear Operations for the state of South Carolina.
Mr. Capps, did you cause to be pre-filed in this docket 24 pages of direct testimony?
Yes, sir, I did.
Do you have any changes or corrections to your direct testimony?
No, sir.
Is your direct testimony true and correct to the best of your knowledge?
Yes, sir.
And if I ask you the same questions today, would your answers be the same?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Capps, did you also cause to be pre-filed rebuttal testimony consisting of 7 pages?
Yes, sir.
Do you have any changes or corrections to your rebuttal testimony?
No, sir.
And is your rebuttal testimony true and correct to the best of your knowledge?
Yes, sir.
If I ask you the same questions in your rebuttal testimony, would your answers be the same?
Yes, sir, they would.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, at this time, I would ask that the pre-filed direct and rebuttal testimony of Mr. Capps be copied into the record as if given orally from the stand today.
Mr. Capps' pre-filed direct and rebuttal testimony will be entered into the record as though given orally from the stand.
Thank you. All right, I'll move to Steve Immel. Mr. Immel, please state your full name and your business address for the record.
Steve Immel, and business address is 526 South Church Street, Charlotte, North Carolina.
By whom are you employed and in what capacity?
employed by Duke Energy. I'm the Vice President within Fossil Hydro Operations responsible for the Carolina Coal region.
Did you cause to be pre-filed in this docket 14 pages of direct testimony?
Yes, sir.
Do you have any changes or corrections to your direct testimony?
No, sir.
And is your direct testimony true and correct to the best of your knowledge?
Yes, sir.
If I asked you the same question today, would your answers be the same?
Yes, they would.
Mr. Immel, did you also cause to be pre-filed rebuttal testimony consisting of 4 pages in this docket?
Yes, sir.
Do you have any changes or corrections to your rebuttal testimony?
I do not.
And is your rebuttal testimony true and correct to the best of your knowledge?
Yes, sir, it is.
If I asked you the same question today, would your answers be the same?
Yes, they would.
All right, Mr. Chairman, at this time, I would ask that the pre-filed direct and rebuttal testimony of Mr. Immel be copied into the record as if given orally from the stand today.
Mr. Immel's pre-filed direct and rebuttal testimony will be read into the record as though given orally from the stand.
Mr. Capps and Mr. Immel, do you all have summaries of your testimony?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Capps, starting with you, would you please provide that summary to the Commission?
Yes, sir. I filed direct testimony and rebuttal testimony in this case. My direct testimony provides information in support of the company's request for a base rate adjustment. To this end, I describe Duke Energy Carolina's nuclear generation assets, update the Commission on capital additions since the prior rate case, provide a high-level view of capital additions planned for the upcoming years, explain key drivers impacting nuclear operations and maintenance costs, and provide operational performance results for calendar year 2017, the test period. Duke Energy Carolina's nuclear fleet consists of 3 generating stations and a total of 7 units. All 7 units have received a 20-year license renewal. Oconee, which began commercial operation in 1973, is currently licensed through 2033 for Units 1 and 2 and 2034 for Unit 3. McGuire began commercial operation in 1981, and Catawba began commercial operation in 1985. McGuire is licensed through 2041 for Unit 1 and 2043 for Unit 2. And both Catawba units are licensed through 2043. Accounting for the joint ownership of Catawba, Duke Energy Carolina's nuclear fleet represents a total capacity of 5,389 megawatts. As in years past, Duke Energy Carolina's nuclear fleet continued to perform well. During the test period, the company achieved a combined capacity factor of 95.87%. Each of the 3 plants exceeded a 92.5% capacity factor, and the company recorded the second highest net annual output, falling just short of the generation record established in 2016. 62% of the company's total power generated during 2017 was from the nuclear fleet, and 2017 represented the 18th consecutive year of Duke Energy Carolina's nuclear plants exceeding a 90% annual capacity factor. Since the 2013 rate case, Duke Energy Carolinas has invested approximately $2.5 billion in capital projects. These capital improvements were required to enhance safety, address regulatory requirements, improve efficiency and output, and preserve performance and reliability of the plants. As a result of the company's successful efforts, customers will continue to benefit from the power provided by Duke Energy's reliable, efficient, and carbon-free nuclear fleet. The company has a proven history of cost-competitive operation of its nuclear assets, concurrent with maintaining safety, quality, and reliability. Duke Energy Carolinas is positioned to continue as a leader in the industry with a solid base of knowledge and experience, and with a nuclear fleet that is highly efficient and reliable. This base rate increase will allow the company to continue the tradition of operational excellence and focus on safe operations, reliable generation, and strong performance that ultimately benefits our customers. My rebuttal testimony responds to ORS witness Willie Morgan's recommendation to remove the company's request to adjust depreciation and amortization expenses to establish a reserve for end-of-life nuclear costs not captured in its decommissioning studies because the end-of-life nuclear costs are not known and measurable, and the date of retirements of the nuclear units is yet uncertain. In response to Mr. Morgan, I explained the end-of-life nuclear reserve fund is reasonable, appropriate, and beneficial to customers to establish now. Regarding nuclear fuel, the company used current forecasts for uranium fabrication and enrichment to calculate the estimated value of underutilized fuel remaining in the last core. When a nuclear unit refuels, approximately 1/3 of the fuel is replaced and the remaining fuel is shifted in the core to maintain safe production capability for the next operating cycle. After the last cycle of operation ends, approximately 2/3 of the fuel remaining in the core is underutilized. Regarding nuclear inventory, the company used the existing inventory balance at the end of the test period as the estimate of inventory remaining on the last day of operation. Nuclear plants must be fully maintained for safety purposes until removed from service, and inventory must be available to support that mission. Maintaining adequate spare parts and material is vital to maintaining that performance. Regarding subsequent license renewal, the company has not yet filed for nor received subsequent license renewal for any of its nuclear units. The company has and plans to continue maintaining the existing Duke Energy Carolinas nuclear fleet such that these additional license extensions remain a viable option. Until subsequent license extensions are requested and granted, each unit's current license correctly bounds the end of life for each unit. Collecting these end-of-life costs during the time the customers receive benefits from the Duke Energy Carolinas nuclear production is in the customer's best interest. If the company ultimately applies for and receives a license extension for all or part of the existing Duke Energy Carolinas nuclear fleet, the company would be open to adjusting the accrual period to reflect shutdown dates based on a renewed license. As company witness Kim Smith stated in her direct testimony, the annual accrual amount can be reviewed and adjusted, if needed, in each future general rate case before the end of the plant's life. This concludes the summary of my direct and rebuttal testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Capps. Mr. Rimmel, do you have a summary of your testimony?
I do.
Would you please provide that summary to the Commission?
Yes, sir. In my direct testimony, I described the company's fossil hydro solar generation assets, provide operational performance results during the test period, update the Commission on capital additions, explain the key drivers impacting O&M cost, and provide a high-level view of capital plan for the next few years for fossil hydro solar generation assets. In particular, DEC fossil hydro solar generation portfolio consists of approximately 14,966 megawatts of generation capacity. This portfolio includes a diverse mix of coal, gas, hydro, and solar facilities to meet our customers' load requirements. These generation systems operate efficiently and reliably during the test period. Since its last rate case, the company added over $917 million of major fossil hydro solar-related capital additions. The most significant investments in new generation are the W.S. Lee combined cycle plant and the two new solar facilities, Monroe and Moxville. These capital investments are necessary to maintain the company's history of safely providing efficient, reliable, and cost-effective generation. My rebuttal testimony was offered in response to Sierra Club witness Hausman's position that the Commission should direct the company to perform economic analysis for its coal stations prior to seeking recovery in capital expenditures. In response to witness Hausman, I stated that the company did perform a comprehensive retirement analysis for Allen Station. Further, for Marshall Station and Blues Creek, the company considered several factors, including the overall feasibility of potential early retirement before spending money on environmental projects. In all cases, the company determined that the early retirement for the coal would not have been financially or operationally feasible when factoring in the need for replacement generation. I also explained that the company's process to manage its fleet are reasonable and prudent, and that a mandate to perform additional analysis is not warranted. This concludes the summary of my direct and rebuttal testimonies.
Thank you, Mr. Immel. Mr. Chairman, the witnesses are available for cross-examination.
Thank you. Vote Solar. Thank you. NAACP, Coastal Conservation League. Thank you. Sierra Club.
Good morning, Mr. Capps and Mr. Immel. My name is Bridget Lee. I'm here on behalf of the Sierra Club. I have just a few minutes of questions for you this morning, and it'll mostly be directed at Mr. Immel. Sir, you've been the company's vice president of fossil and hydro operations since 2016, is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And do you have your direct testimony in front of you?
I do.
Great. On page 3 of that testimony, the first question posed asks, what are your duties as vice president of central services? That's not your position, is it?
No, ma'am.
Okay.
That is not. I am the vice president of fossil hydro operations, Carolina Coal.
Okay, great. Yeah, I think that might be Mr. Miller's former
Typo.
position.
That is correct.
Okay.
Sorry,
But so does the answer you gave there describe your duties as vice president of fossil and hydro?
It does.
Okay, thanks. Just wanted to make sure I had that straight. You also mentioned your time as station manager at Allen and Marshall plants. When did you serve there?
I was at Allen Station 2005 through 2010, and at Marshall Station 2010 through 2012.
Thank you. And Mr. Immel, in your role as Vice President of Fossil and Hydro, you're responsible for overseeing operation of the company's coal fleet, is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And does your job include making decisions about when particular coal units should be operated?
We are dispatched from a centralized energy control system, if that's the question.
Yeah, thanks. So, and just to make sure I understand, is that that sort of dispatch is the most cost-efficient units would be called upon first?
That is correct, and that is not in my organization. We respond to that request.
Understood. Thank you. As part of your responsibilities, decisions about when coal retirements would be made, is that part of your responsibility?
No, ma'am, it's not.
Okay. Who is the ultimate decision maker on that?
Well, our integrated resource planning process makes those decisions. That's a very comprehensive, involved process that takes place annually. It's updated annually, and they are looking forward at customer demand in both North and South Carolina. And in their analysis, they consider energy efficiency, design, demand-side management. They look at what renewable technologies are commercially viable and available. And through that process, we determine retirement.
Okay. Are you aware that as part of the IRP process, the model the company relies upon actually sort of hardwires retirement dates and assumes that the retirement dates given in the depreciation study will be the ones?
Well, the depreciation study is somewhat of an input into the integrated resource planning process.
Okay.
So if that helps.
Yeah, thank you. Looking at page 5 of your direct testimony, you're describing there the company's generation portfolio. And looking at those numbers, I see almost 15,000 megawatts of generating capacity total, and of that, 67,064 megawatts of coal-fired generation. So it's fair to say that coal is roughly 45% of the portfolio?
Of the fossil hydro portfolio, yes, ma'am.
Okay, thanks. And of the 13 coal units on the Duke Energy Carolina system, all but one of those began operating over 44 years ago. Is that right?
Currently, the oldest one is 1957.
Okay. That's the Allen station?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thanks. And on page 7 of your direct testimony, you mentioned the probable retirement date for the Allen station has recently been updated to be 2026. Can you explain that change?
Yes. So Allen Station is a 5-unit facility. The company currently has a an order to shut down units 1 through 3 as part of a consent decree in 2024. The projected retirement dates of units 4 and 5 are 2028. The depreciation study, we look at station in total. And yes, the depreciation study that was recently completed recommends station-wise in terms of how you would calculate depreciation 2026.
I see. Thanks for the explanation. So does that mean that the company plans to retire units 4 and 5 in 2028?
Currently, that is what's in the integrated resource plan. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. You testified that the company plans to invest $1 billion in its generation fleet between this year and 2021. Is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Of that billion, how much does the company estimate spending on those 13 coal units?
I don't have that number in my hip pocket.
You did mention of that billion, some of the resources would be spent on dual fuel co-firing projects at Marshalls and Blues. Is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you know how much the company estimates for those projects?
I do. Estimate. Let me look here at the.
Sure.
Yes, so Blues Creek currently estimated at approximately $117 million to convert. Actually convert the 2 units, which are 1,100 megawatts each. The conversion would provide 50% capacity on each one of those units of gas, which certainly provides the customers in North and South Carolina the very much needed fuel diversity. Marshall Station's estimated cost is $85 million. That's a 4-unit station, and we would be converting the 2 larger supercritical machines to 50% capability on gas. That's units 3 and 4, and Marshall 1 and 2. Currently, the plan would be 10 to 40% capacity.
Thank you so much. You anticipated my other questions about the gas to coal breakdown. But just to clarify one thing, so dual fuel co-firing, it's not the same as converting the plant to full gas burning, right? Coal would still need to be burned.
That is correct. We'd have the ability to burn up to 50% coal and any combination with gas, or 50% gas and any combination with coal. So I'd go on to say we just recently completed the Cliffside 6 dual fuel conversion. At Cliffside Unit 6, we have 100% capability on gas, and really we can blend any amount of coal with the gas.
Thank you. Could these projects extend the lifespan of those coal plants, the Marshall and Blues?
I don't know that it would extend the life. It does provide so much more flexibility in how we operate them. It provides capabilities to integrate with the renewable resources we have coming on. With a coal plant, you have to follow the load demand, and a coal plant responds slower than gas. So by providing a fuel of a gas source, you can follow that load more quickly, which is required to support renewable operation. When the cloud cover comes in, you've got to be able to follow that load. So I would say the flexibility it provides is what's the benefit.
Appreciate that. Thank you. Is the company planning any other large capital investments at its coal units?
Well, we have our normal maintenance activities at some of these large plants can be fairly costly.
Okay.
It's normal maintenance type capital.
Sure. How about plans to convert the coal units from wet to dry ash handling?
That has been completed at many of the facilities we just spoke about.
Okay. And do you know the sort of a ballpark, what type of investment we're talking about? Is that over $100 million per plant? I imagine it depends on the specifics.
It certainly depends on the plant, but to give you an idea, the bottom ash conversion at Allen Station, which would be the smallest of the projects, was roughly $70 million, I believe.
Okay. Thank you. Turning to your SIR rebuttal testimony, Mr. Immel, you stated that the company performs retirement analyses on an as-needed basis. In determining whether that analysis is in fact needed, what type of factors does the company consider?
Well, I would go back to Allen Station. That station is the oldest in the coal fleet. And so it is nearer end of life than the other facilities. So the quick analysis is you compare it to the replacement of that generation. So if you go to the newer, more efficient, supercritical machines such as Blues Creek, those 2 units, and even a Marshall 3 and 4, the replacement capacity for those units, for a Marshall 3 and 4 or for a Blues Creek 1 and 2 would be upwards of $1.78 billion.
Okay. I'll get back to that 1.7, but I guess my question's a little bit different. I'm wondering, before so you mentioned for Allen, the company has prepared a retirement analysis, but what factors would lead to that analysis?
Again, at Allen, with the new CCR regulations that were coming, we were evaluating this $70 million expenditure on bottom ash to meet new regulations. That's what would prompt that type review. In combination with that station is getting close to what we're projecting would be retirement. That's what prompted the analysis.
Got it. Thank you. So for the $1.7 billion that you mentioned, is that an estimate of the cost of building a new combined cycle gas plant?
It would be, yes, ma'am.
Okay. So, and you had mentioned that understanding that large cost, the company didn't conduct a comprehensive analysis for Marshall or Blues. So was a gas plant the only replacement generation considered for those 2 units? I'm sorry, 2 plants?
Yes, but let me provide just some background on that. So we talked a little bit about our integrated resource planning process. So, and again, a comprehensive look at all the energy demands, the energy efficiency, the demand side management, what available technologies are there to meet that demand. So from their review on a regular basis, then they provide what is the most economic solution in terms of capacity and generation for the customers. And gas, we take into consideration the energy demand by the customers, but we also, since we operate an integrated system, we have to look at peak capacities. And so as an example, a peak capacity for us is in the winter, and it's early in the morning, and early in the morning before the sun comes up. So if I use the example of solar, it is considered, but meeting that capacity demand, that peak capacity, it really has no, it cannot contribute to the capacity demand.
What about solar plus storage when the technologies are paired?
Certainly it would, and again, we have to look at what viable technologies are in place for storage. And again, the integrated resource planning process, that they look into that. Yes, ma'am.
Thanks. Mr. Immel, were you here yesterday afternoon when Mr. Fallon testified?
I was.
Okay. Do you recall Mr. Fallon stating in response, I think, to a question from Commissioner Whitfield, that the company is looking to decarbonize and the country is looking to decarbonize?
Yes, ma'am, I recall.
Do you agree with that statement?
Yes, ma'am.
And would you also agree with me that coal-fired power plants generate and release carbon dioxide?
Yes.
Okay. So how can this commission and the company's ratepayers take the claim that the company is looking to decarbonize seriously when the company continues to invest hundreds of millions of dollars in its coal units?
So our base year that we look at is 2005, and from 2005 to the end of 2018, DEC has reduced their CO2 production by 32%. Okay. We also have a goal to continue that reduction to 40% by 2030.
Thank you. I have nothing further. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Lee. Energy users.
No questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Elliott. Walmart. Thank you. ORS.
Capps, I'm afraid I'm only focusing on you this morning.
Yes, sir, I understand.
And I wanted to ask you about, obviously my focus here is the reserve fund for the end-of-life nuclear costs, because I think we've got a dispute between the company and ORS on that issue. For starters, can you tell me again how many units or plants are involved in this end-of-life fund that you're asking for?
It's 3 plants, it's 7 units.
In your testimony, in your rebuttal, you stated that it is in the best interest of today's customers for Duke to build up this pot of money. Can you explain how it is in the best interest of current customers?
Both the fuel and the inventory, the customers are benefiting from that today. So having that reserve fund established over time seems more prudent than just having whatever customers are aligned with the company at the time the plants are shut down. Bear all that cost.
What are we looking at as far as a shutdown date on these plants?
The current license is between 2033 and 2043.
And Duke is additionally going to seek relicensing of all of these units?
We are finalizing our evaluation for subsequent license renewal. That process will require us to go through a technical evaluation and make a submittal to the NRC, and then ultimately get that NRC technical review and their approval for a subsequent license to operate the stations for an additional 20 years.
So 20-year extension on the current end of life would be what the NRC would grant, is that correct?
That's right. I mean, essentially, the subsequent license gives you the opportunity, gives you the option to operate the station for an additional 20 years.
Does Duke have any plans currently to shutter any of these nuclear plants?
Our current plans would be to finalize our evaluation and pursue subsequent license renewal. Okay. But currently, I mean, we have an end of life date that's established by the license today, based on the first 20-year license renewal.
Have any of these plants already gone through the relicensing process that you have?
So there are 2 aspects of relicensing or license renewal. The first period from 40 years to 20 years, or to 60 years, I'm sorry, the industry calls license renewal, and all 3 of these plants have been through that. The subsequent period is called subsequent license renewal, and that's the period from 60 years to 80 years. But that subsequent license renewal period has to receive its own technical review and evaluation relative to the effects of aging on the plant, to show the plants can continue to operate safely and reliably.
To date, has Duke had any of their requests for relicensing or extensions of life to NRC denied?
To date, we have not, but we also have only submitted for the license renewal period.
Going back to this reserve fund again specifically, how much is Duke asking to collect from ratepayers for this?
It's approximately $7 million annually.
So $7 million every year for the foreseeable future, is that correct?
Well, the $7 million is based on the currently licensed period of the 7 units. And certainly if we worked our way through subsequent license renewal and we were granted a license to operate the stations for an additional 20 years, then we would adjust that based on that information.
I'm doing a little quick math, which is dangerous up here, but by my estimation, then the earliest date that a plant would shut down in 2033 is 14 years from now, and at $7 million a year, we're looking at close to $100 million, aren't we, that would be in this fund by that time?
I'll take your word for it.
Okay.
I'm not any better at quick math either.
All right. Are the customers going to get any kind of a return on this? Duke's asking for return on their deferrals, but the customers get any return on this money of theirs that you are holding?
That I do not know. You would need to ask Kim Smith and Rates that question.
We heard. Did you hear or did you read any of the transcripts or anything from the night hearings in this case?
Some of it, but certainly not all of it.
So I take it probably, and based on the testimony here yesterday, that you're familiar that a lot of customers have said that they have a very difficult time.
Yes, sir, I am.
Do you think that it's fair that the company asks for an additional, on top of the actual costs, that the company is asking for this pot of money to be established for some unknown future use?
I don't think it's a question of fairness, and I do not believe it is an unknown future use. I mean, the use of the money is very clearly tied to the inventory and the fuel costs that can't be recovered for the final cycle. So it's a matter of determining how, from an economic standpoint, what is the most advantageous way to deal with that cost.
Going back to, we also talked about there's a decommissioning fund also as well, isn't there?
Yes, sir, there is.
Could you explain for the commission what the difference is between the decommissioning fund and this reserve fund?
So, I mean, the decommissioning fund essentially covers the cost to dismantle and disassemble the station after it is shut down following its period of licensed operation. These two aspects are not covered in the scope of the decommissioning fund.
That decommissioning fund is something that had been collected over a series of years as well. Is that correct?
Yes, sir, that is correct.
Okay, and going back to this period again, the earliest you would use the funds out of this reserve fund would be possibly 2033 or 2043. Isn't that correct?
It would be 2033 for Oconee, and it would be 2043 for Catawba and McGuire Unit 2, which are the later units, based on the currently approved operation.
Right, so without any relicensing, that's the current end dates.
Yes,
So
sir.
do you know if Duke Energy has any plans to come in for another rate case in the next 10 years?
No, sir, I do not.
Wouldn't it be more reasonable just to wait until we're closer to the end of life of these units before you come in and start collecting money from ratepayers?
I mean, I think you can certainly make that case, but I think it would also be true that the later you wait and make that decision, then the more substantial the cost, the short-term cost associated with that action would be. So I think that's a decision we've got to make. I mean, do we want a little bit now over time, or do we want to find ourselves in a position where ultimately it's a lot?
I'd come up with that $98 million before. Do y'all actually have an estimate? Can you determine now what the cost would be for this end-of-life cost, this fuel cost?
The end-of-life fuel cost is based on the current projections for uranium, for the enrichment cost, and for the fabrication. So, I mean, it is a cost based on a projection of future cost.
Do you have a number?
I do not. I mean, not off the top of my head. We can certainly pull it out of what Ms. Smith submitted in the rates.
I'm going to go to the process again, because you talked about fuel, and I understand that, but really you're talking about when you go through a refueling at one of these nuclear plants, you don't replace all of the fuel. Isn't that correct?
Yes, sir, that is correct.
So how much? About a third each time?
Approximately 1/3 of the fuel in a core is replaced each out.
Is it possible for the units to continue to operate when you don't have a full load of good fuel in it? In other words, 1/3 or 2/3 of the fuel?
No, sir, it is not.
Okay. What would be the intent to do with that fuel then? Is this when you shutter this plant 20, 30, 40 years in the future, what do you actually do with that spent fuel, or non-spent fuel, I guess?
I mean, ultimately, at the point we shut the plant down, it would in fact be considered spent fuel, and ultimately that fuel is stored in the used fuel pool at the station for a period of time, and then it is loaded into a dry storage cask, similar to fuel we have burned in the past, and it would be stored in a dry storage cask.
And again, you don't have a specific number on what this cost would be for doing this, do you?
We have an estimated cost based on the projections for the cost of uranium, enrichment, and fabrication, the things that go into fuel cost.
So it's not an actual known and measurable cost, it's an estimate.
Correct, but no cost in the future is typically known and measurable.
That's all I have. Thank you, Mr. Capps. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Nelson. Commissioners. Commissioner Whitfield.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks to both of you for being on this panel. I've got a couple of questions for each of you. Guess I'm going to start with you, Mr. Emmel, first. You seem pretty fluent talking about Dr. Hausman's testimony. I want to ask you a question related to that. I'm going to cite a page or two in there, and if you need to get there, we'll take a minute. But in Sierra Club witness Hausman's testimony on his direct pre-file testimony, page 17 and 18, he discusses Duke Energy Carolina's coal plant performance. And of course, you, in your testimony, and again here on the stand, you have said these systems have operated efficiently and reliably during the test year period. I guess, number one, do you agree with Dr. Hausman's statement on page 17 that, quote, most of DEC's coal plants have been operating at very low and decreasing capacity factors for the past several years?
So, yes, I would agree. Our older, less efficient coal capacity factors have been decreasing, and you would expect that. You would anticipate that. We have brought on more efficient gas-fired operations to replace the energy production that some of those older coal plants used to provide. So yes, the capacity factors drop, but the important thing to consider is we also have to run a system around peak capacity. So I'll use it, and I think he does cite Allen Station as a dramatic decline in capacity factors. So I'd cite an example early in January of 2018. I think it was the first week of January 2018. If some of you recall, it was, I think the average highs was in the low 30s, and we had lows for the entire week in the teens and even lower. During that week, those older, less efficient coal-fired plants, all 5 Allen units, Cliffside 5, Marshall 1 and 2, which I think he cites, those facilities ran at 90% and above capacity factor to meet that demand during that cold period of time. So there's two components. One is certainly capacity factor, which is the amount of generation we need, but during those cold peak times, we've got to meet capacity.
Well, and let me go down that path just a little more, is because he implied, I guess further went on to imply that these units were being operated as peaking units instead of baseload units. Could you talk about that a little bit?
I would say that is accurate. Years ago, when the capacity factors were high and they were the more efficient economic units to run, they were base load. Now we have purposely moved them into a peaking unit. Yes, sir.
I don't think I'm going to go any further. I think you had a good exchange with Ms. Lee about retirements and so forth, so I'm not going to continue down that path, but I do have a question or two for you, Mr. Capps. Mr. Nelson actually went kind of thoroughly down the path I'm going to go, and certainly you've done a good job in your testimony and here on the stand and written testimony as well, discussing your heavy reliance, the company's heavy reliance on all 3 plant locations and all the nuclear plants, all the units at those plant locations, and how heavily reliant the company is on your fleet, and also you talked about meet your capacity factors and being above that, and how they've operated. But back to where Mr. Nelson went about the end of life cycle as it pertains to the fuel. And of course, we've had the nuclear decommissioning fund come up in other cases since that can't be. Sounds like that can only be used, as you were saying, for the dismantling of the physical part of the plant, and fuel doesn't come into play into that, and that's why you're asking for this amount. But what I would like to ask you, along the line Mr. Nelson was going, is if the commission were to grant the amount you're looking for, the $7 million, would the company be willing to submit reports, maybe along with the annual fuel proceedings, since we are discussing fuel, or to ORS periodically to look at this, because these retirements aren't occurring until 2033 and then 2041, I believe, and 2043. So those are long times out in the future. And I guess I'm asking an engineer an accounting question because Ms. Smith's not on the stand, but you do say that company witness Kim Smith said an accrual account can be reviewed and adjusted if needed in the future.
Yes, sir.
So who's going to review and adjust that? I mean, I know ORS is all over the top of it, and Mr. Nelson was, but he might not be here forever. I might not be here forever. And who's going to monitor this going forward out other than ORS? Who in the company, and what would you be willing to do to stay on top of that?
I mean, we would need to ask Ms. Smith specifically, but that would generally be done out of the finance and accounting group. And I mean, certainly if we needed to provide some report or some accounting to the commission, I'm sure that we could come up with something that would be suitable for that.
And in your mind, I know I'm asking an accounting question again, but in your mind, the $7 million number that you discussed with Mr. Nelson is as accurate as you think you can be? Because Mr. Nelson also discussed with you that we often talk about carrying costs, but here you would be collecting that from the ratepayers in advance and taking their money.
Yes, sir. And it is, as we said, it is based on a projection. And I mean, certainly we spent the majority of the time looking at the license life of the stations, but similarly, you could look at what is that projection for uranium and enrichment and fabrication at a future point in time and make a decision based on that. Does there need to be an adjustment?
And I certainly understand what you were saying about the use of that remaining fuel, and I think if I understood you correctly, Mr. Nelson, even the unspent fuel would also have to be stored. I think is the way you explained that to him as well.
Yes, sir. And the problem is that unspent fuel. I mean, we normally collect based on the use of the fuel that's burned. And that fuel would never be used, would never be burned. So it would have a residual value at the point the station was shut down.
Well, thank you for your testimony, and we certainly are concerned. I certainly understand that it has to be dealt with, but I certainly see ORS's concern to the ratepayer as well.
Yes, sir.
So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner Whitfield. Commissioner Belser.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Capps, I'm not trying to beat a dead horse here, but I am trying to understand a little bit more about this reserve.
Yes, ma'am.
And I'm new to the commission, so you have to bear with me as I'm trying to learn some stuff here too. Based on your testimony and the cross-examination, theoretically, at the end of when the plant's decommissioned, y'all expect there to be about 2/3 left in the rods. Is that right? 2/3 of the fuel?
Yes, ma'am. Just the way cores are designed and the way fuel's burned over the cycle.
Is there any salvage value of that? That could be sent to another plant or sold to another utility?
I think, and it's an opinion. It's not highly researched, but my immediate reaction would be the cost of deconstructing an irradiated fuel assembly. It just wouldn't be physically possible in reality from a dose irradiation standpoint. You couldn't do anything with it.
And I believe that this $7 million estimate is based on, I believe you said, projections of the cost of uranium.
Yes, ma'am.
How far out do those projections go? Is that the projection of uranium in 2033 or 2043 when the current license is?
Yes, ma'am. I mean, it would be out through that period of time. I'm guessing that y'all expect the projections to be for the cost to be higher then than it is now. Yes, ma'am. We would. Uranium is extremely low right now, as low as it has been. Well,
what about starting the reserve based on the current projections, and instead of adjusting downward annual or when y'all come back in, make the adjustments based on the then cost of uranium if it's increased?
You lost me with that. So you're saying
instead of starting at your projection for the end cost,
right?
Start it now or at the price of uranium now, and then when y'all come back in the next case, if uranium's gone up, you could adjust it then and kind of gradually build up rather than starting what you think is going to be the high end and go down.
Yes, ma'am. I understand what you're saying now. Just try to shorten the window to try to increase the
Well, especially if the plan is to seek the additional 20 years, and that, I mean, that sounds like what might be happening. I'm just throwing that out. And let it be gradual since y'all are starting early. It's just a thought. Would that be doable?
Yes, ma'am. I mean, I'm sure there are a number of ways we could approach it, and you know, I don't think you could say anyone is wrong, because anyone will move you toward the end state, which is ultimately to be able to start building up a reserve so that when you get to that point, the cost is actually covered. So I certainly think there are other ways we could approach coming up with the dollar value.
Why was this not covered in the decommissioning studies?
I think if I understand it correctly, what is in the decommissioning fund has a regulatory definition of what cost is included in that fund, and this is not part of that.
Are you aware of this reserve being implemented anywhere else?
Yes, ma'am. It is approved in North Carolina.
Okay. Anywhere else in the state? Not necessarily a Duke company, but.
No, ma'am. I'm not, and that doesn't necessarily mean it's not. It just means I'm not knowledgeable of it.
Thank you, Mr. Capps. Mr. Emmel, you used a term a couple of times. I just want some clarification about supercritical machines when you were talking about some of your plants. Can you tell me what that means?
Certainly. Supercritical versus subcritical has to do with the temperature and pressures we operate the steam plant. As you get higher pressures, which we call supercritical, above 3,200 psi, it's more efficient. You're getting more efficient energy out of the steam. Those are the newer, more efficient machines. It's required to have different materials in the boiler, et cetera, et cetera. So it's really an operating pressure and temperature. Below 3,200, we call it subcritical. That's the older design where steam is actually converted in a steam drum. Water is converted into a steam drum.
It doesn't have anything to do with the importance of the machine. And,
No, ma'am.
okay.
No.
That's what I.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner Belser. Commissioner Hamilton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I believe it was you, Mr. Cabbs, that indicated that nuclear was 62% of the generation mix.
Yes, sir, for the generation during the test year during 2017.
Can you give me the amount for renewables, gas, and coal?
No, sir, I cannot. We can certainly get that for you.
I was just wondering how much of the use of natural gas has reduced the carbon output.
Yes, sir. We can take that as a lookup and bring it back to you.
I'd appreciate it if you would, sir. Mr. Chairman, if that could be a late file exhibit.
Okay, we will do that as a late file.
I might have some information, Commissioner.
Hang on one second. All right.
I might have some information. I believe this is 2018 data. I'm not sure if it's the 2017 data, but in terms of energy generation, yeah, thank you, Kamal. The coal fleet in DEC was 26% of the energy produced. Gas was approximately 11% of the energy produced. And again, nuclear was approximately 62% of the energy produced.
Okay, and I believe gas will be, as you indicated, would be increasing as coal decreases?
It is increasing, yes, sir.
Okay. And what is the difference in the carbon output between natural gas and coal?
It's probably 50% less than gas.
Okay. And renewable, do you have a amount of renewables now that are in the generation mix?
Yes, sir, we do. It does represent a very small, though. In 2018, it was less than 0.5% of energy generated.
Thank you, sir, very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Hamilton. Does that get your question answered so we don't need a late file? Okay. Commissioner Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a question for Mr. Capps. On page 5 of your pre-filed direct testimony, you state that DE Carolinas continues to face new costs and inflationary pressures. Have you found that? I think it's line 8. Starts at line 8, goes through line 9.
Yes, sir.
Could you please provide an example of significant new costs and pressures?
I mean, I think the probably the easiest ones would be material costs. I mean, we're a bit of a specialized industry, so there's a number of things that we use that come from a limited population of suppliers, and we continue to see pressure on those material costs. And then the other is in labor, both the contract labor that we use, those rates continue to increase, and then we call it specialty skills, but there are things, inspections, repairs, that have to be done at the station that we don't have the resources to do in-house, so we typically end up contracting those from a specialty vendor in the nuclear industry, a Framatome, a Westinghouse, and we continue to see escalation in those costs. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Capps, learned something new yesterday that one of your witnesses informed us that the Congress has reinstated the federal tax credits for nuclear. Are you familiar with that?
Very recently.
Yes, sir. Will those tax credits be available to Duke for keeping existing nuclear facilities online? For example, if you can get an extension of your licensing, will those credits be available to you under the new act?
No, sir, not that I'm aware of.
It's only for new construction?
Yes, sir. That is my understanding.
Because I understand Secretary Perry's going to be in Georgia today, and apparently the administration has reached out to the Vogel plant to provide, I don't know if it's loan guarantees or what, but what do you know about that? Because that's an existing plant. Well, it's actually in construction. It's not online. So.
Right. So Vogel has 2 units, Vogel 1 and 2, that have been operating for a period, and then Vogel 3 and 4 are new units.
Right. So, do you know what's being offered to them? Is it loan guarantees by the federal government, or do you know?
I do not know for certain, but Vogel 3 and 4 was a part of that original group of plants that applied for the guarantees.
Well, back to the fund that you're trying to create. Has that ever been done before?
The reserve fund.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. We have filed and asked for that fund in North Carolina and been granted the allowance for that.
For nuclear?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and was that a part of your recent filing there?
I do not think it was the most recent one. I think it was prior to that, but we can pull that up.
Do you know how much money's accrued into the North Carolina fund?
I do not. We would need to ask.
Okay. Or how long has this been in effect?
I do not know.
It just seems to me that there's so much uncertainty about what the actual cost will ultimately be due to all the factors we've gone over, that it's highly speculative as to know what's going to be needed at the point in the future when these plants are decommissioned.
I mean, it is certainly based on an estimate. What we do know is it won't be zero.
Yes, sir.
So we need to.
Well, let me give you a scenario where it could be zero. What if, for example, the federal government decides to in the effort to try to reduce carbon emissions, to beef up the nuclear industry? What if they offer tax credits or loan guarantees or other assistance to keep these plants operational and also to assist with their decommissioning? I mean, that's a possibility, isn't it?
I mean, certainly anything is a possibility, but that is not. I mean, a future view of them taking that action, I don't think would be a prudent way for us to approach trying to run the business.
Well, I understand what you're saying, but it's all very speculative is my point, and we just don't know. And so I guess my question is it really fair to the customer to have to kind of set aside these monies over years, not really knowing what the final bill is going to be?
I mean, again, I'll go back to, I do not think I know with certainty it will not be zero. So there's certainly a number of ways we could approach coming up with what is a reasonable cost. My concern is if you don't start collecting ahead of time from folks who benefit now and you don't build that fund, then we would have a similar question about what's prudent and what's fair. If we wait until the cost is certain, then it'll be a huge cost spread over a very short period over a very finite population of people. And we'll be having a similar discussion at that point.
But the entire industry is facing the same problem, and I'm just wondering, is North Carolina the only state that's created a reserve fund, to your knowledge?
I do not know that, Commissioner.
Yes, sir. I'd like to know, if somebody can check on it, how other companies are dealing with this problem. And I'd also like to know, assuming it's approved, is this money going to be put in a separate interest-bearing account, not to be used for any other purpose? Or what's the plan there from an accounting standpoint?
Commissioner Irvin, that would be a question for Kim Smith.
Yes, sir. Just a lot of questions surrounding it, and I think we need some answers before we create something new. We've recently been burned in South Carolina, as you know, down in Fairfield County, where we've approved cost in advance.
Yes, sir.
And a lot of things can happen when you start making projections about future costs. And we just need some more information before I'm satisfied that it's appropriate. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Commissioner Howard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I got a couple of questions. And before I start, I'll admit that some of these questions are really not imperative to the rate case. So consequently, if you don't know them, I understand. I'll go talk to my good friend Google when I leave here. Curiosity is killing me. How many total nuclear units are there in the Duke system to include, the Kentuckys and Ohio's? Do you know?
Total units. So we've got 6 sites, 11 units, and they're all in the Carolinas.
So there's no nuclear units. That probably answer my next question. You got a presence in Kentucky, right?
Yes, sir.
Are you familiar with the generation mix in Kentucky? And I guess obviously the question is how much coal is used in Kentucky versus the other areas.
I am not.
That's fine. I mean, that's something that.
It's
just anybody but me, and I don't know why I worry about it. Because of the units in both Carolinas that you have, did that give you any economies of scale when you come to fuel purchasing?
Yes, sir. It does.
And then you mentioned the increase in nuclear fuel cost. Correct?
Well, increases in the fuel stream, the uranium, the enrichment, and then the fabrication.
That was my next question. Of the 3 areas, which is the most vulnerable for cost increase?
I think it would be the cost of the uranium ore, the front end of the process.
How many outages did you have, and it might have been a testimony, but I didn't say it. How many outages did you have in your units in the test year? And of the outages, how many were scheduled and non-scheduled?
I will have to go back and look that up, Commissioner. I don't know that off.
Yeah, I think that's a figure I think would play into the rate case as far as fuel cost and efficiency of nuclear units.
Right.
Thank you. Commissioner Hamilton asked you the percentage of natural gas, the percentage of greenhouse gas. I'll take that one step further. What is the percentage of natural gas emissions, coal emissions versus natural gas in your new state-of-the-art plants versus your older coal plants?
I'm not sure I understand your question, Commissioner Howard.
What is the state of emissions and the difference in percentage between natural gas and greenhouse gas emissions in older coal plants versus newer coal plants, or is it the same?
Between 2 coal plants, an older vintage plant and a newer vintage.
You had several state of the arts, and I don't know the name of which plant, but you had several state of the art plants that had basically state of the art emission control, and then there are other plants that were older plants.
Yes, sir. I understand your question now. So yes, the older, less efficient coal plants as compared to the newer, I'll call them the supercritical units that are newer in age. They're more efficient. Right. They're more efficient. The combustion process is the same. You're still burning coal. But however, since they are more efficient, if you looked at CO2 production on a megawatt basis, you'd have less CO2 per megawatt, but it's not going to be a dramatic decrease. Percentage points, 5 to 10% maybe, just based on how much more efficient it is.
Okay, thank you. My last question might not have anything to do with it, but what does MOX play into the spent fuel thing? Does it, Mr. Capps?
MOX fuel?
Yep.
No, sir, it would not for us, just because we have not used MOX fuel.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Commissioners, any other questions? Okay, Mr. Capps, I know that I'm always interested in Catawba and McGuire. I think you already answered my question about not starting the end of life fund now, ending up in some sort of rate shock later on. And Commissioner Whitfield, he's talking about where he and Mr. Nelson are going to be, but in 2043, I'll only be 90. So I want to know what's going to happen there. Any redirect, Mr. Robinson?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I have a few very brief redirect. However, before I begin, I just wanted to note, Mr. Chairman, that for the questions regarding the Nuclear Reserve Fund that Commissioner Whitfield asked, Irvin, as well as Commissioner Belzer, we will make sure to have a witness available to be able to answer and address those questions in detail.
Great. Thank you.
And then I do have a few redirect just for Mr. Capps. Mr. Capps, do you recall some questioning by ORS counsel regarding the subsequent license, the SLR?
Yes, sir, I do.
Can you just describe for us a bit in terms of what that process looks like?
So the subsequent license renewal process we would essentially give the NRC a formal notification that we're going to apply for subsequent license renewal. And then we would, as we work through each station, we would have to do a technical evaluation of the aging effects on the station and be able to show technically, analytically, that the station is safe to operate for an additional 20 years. And it would tend to focus on the things that have age-dependent degradation mechanisms. Concrete, cable has proven to be an issue, reactor vessel materials, so we would evaluate those specific items.
Thank you. And in general, is there a difference from your perspective in the stringency of the review under the license renewal versus the subsequent license renewal?
There is a difference. I mean, the difference is we've got more operating experience. We've got more data and a broader experience base. So there are things that have to be evaluated or things that have to be evaluated in a different manner for subsequent license renewal than the original license renewal, just because we are more informed by the experience base.
And are you aware of any plant in the United States that has received an SLR at this point?
There are no plants that have received subsequent license renewal. There are 3 plants, one Dominion plant, one Exelon plant, and one Next Era Energy plant that made their submittal to the NRC in 2018. So they are in their review process.
So given that, what is the company's obligation as it relates to its nuclear fleet's operation under current licensure?
The obligation under current licensure is the dates we discussed before, 2033 to 2043, okay, for the current license period for the 3 DEC Carolinas plants.
Nothing further.
Thank you. Any recross on those questions? Okay. That concludes this portion. Gentlemen, appreciate your testimony, and you may step down.
And Mr. Chairman,
yes, sir.
I would ask at this time that Mr. Capps and Mr. Emmel be excused. In addition to that, I just wanted to clarify for the record. So Mr. Emmel filed direct testimony, originally filed by adopting the testimony originally filed by Joseph Miller and adopted by Mr. Emmel.
Thank you. Noted, and I think we got that one. Okay, you are excused, and we're going to take a break before we continue with the next one.